Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. These pak choi, although they're still growing, have started to go to seed, so they're past their best, and the last couple of days they have been ravaged by either pigeons or pheasants. I haven't caught either in the act, but both have that distinctive pattern of tearing at the leaves, and these certainly have been torn up. So their days are done, and I need to clear the bed and prepare it for spring vegetables when the ground warms up in a few weeks' time. On today's programme, we revel in dahlias at their very best. We meet a man who has dedicated his life to collecting over 1,900 varieties of winter's precious pearl, the snowdrop.
So this is Savile Gold. I've had it for about 14 or 15 years. This is the first time I've got it to flower.
And Nick Bailey has been to Cornwall to see a truly spectacular display of magnolias. As the snowdrops fade for about a month afterwards is the perfect moment to lift and divide them. Snowdrops spread by seed quite successfully, but relatively slowly. And of course you can plant them as bulbs, but by far the best way to increase your stock of snowdrops is to take a clump, lift it, divide it, and replant it in 2 or 3 different sections. And you can see that if I take that and just gently with my hand break that, and that gives me 2 substantial clumps that quite quickly, within about a year or 2, will double in size. If you take half your snowdrops and divide them into 2, you've automatically doubled your stock, and then that's going to double in a couple of years. And if you do it every year, it's surprising how quickly you can go from, say, a dozen plants to a beautiful white snowy drift of flowers. And there's a snowdrop bulb, nice big bulb, nice and healthy, root system beneath it, and whatever you do, don't cut the foliage off, because as that dies back, it would feed the bulb, which is going to contain next year's flower. These snowdrops on this side have only been here about 4 years, and they were planted singly all the way along, so you can see that they have spread pretty well already. And snowdrops are unusual amongst spring bulbs in that they really enjoy woodland conditions that is slightly damp, but there are always trees present. You never see snowdrops in a big open field. They need a bit of shade and some moisture. So put that in there. I really want to bulk up on this side. These ones are only 2 years old, and we cut this hedge back in the winter to reveal them. But what it's revealed is it's a bit patchy. So if I can plant a few in here, we can start to bulk it out. And also, I don't want them to look like rows of park bedding. It should look as natural as possible. Now, Longmeadow is fairly damp at the moment, but you mustn't let them dry out. And although the chances of fine, dry weather in March and April are pretty slim, if it is very dry, it's a good idea to keep them watered. So what I like to do is water them in and then maybe water them again before the leaves die back. Once the leaves have died back, you can forget all about them. They'll look after themselves. Now, I adore snowdrops and would be happy to have many, many more, but for some, snowdrops are one of those plants that become a benign obsession. Last month, we went to visit a national collection in the garden of the passionate galanthophile Steve Owen.
Snowdrop collectors are called galanthophiles. The word comes from galanthus. Galanthophile means snowdrop lover. And galanthus is the botanical name for snowdrop. It means milk flower. We've got about 1,900 varieties of snowdrop here. Each year I managed to acquire some of the snowdrops that I've been looking for, sometimes for quite some years. Lydiard Diana is an example. I've been looking for it for 12 years. It's an unusual snowdrop because it has 6 petals of equal length and not a trace of green on the petals. It's taken so long to find it. Well, this is a newly acquired snowdrop called Snow White's Gnome, which is in its original pot, growing, happy, and my aim is to keep it that way. I want the bulbs to bulk up. They're small when I get them. I want them to become big, fat, healthy bulbs. This is lower school, and if they're healthy at the end of that time, they get moved to middle school. The last thing I want to do is to take it out of its pot and plunge it into a cold, unwelcoming ground. Would you like it? No, nor would I. Nor do these. So this is Savile Gold. I've had it for about 14 or 15 years. This is the first time I've got it to flower. Most of the time it's been a fight to keep it alive, a single squinny leaf poking up. But I've persevered, I've cosseted it, I've prayed to it, and now it's flowering for the first time in 14 years. Hallelujah. When the snowdrops leave lower school, they get promoted to middle school. These snowdrops have been potted into a larger pot, as you can see. I feed them with a variety of feeds, so the tomato feed, the seaweed extract. Really, I'm not too fussy, and the snowdrops are not too fussy about exactly what they get, as long as they're getting fed. They're all different. They're like babies. Isn't that a fantastic snowdrop? Comes from France. Fée Clochette. Translation, fairy bell. Isn't it beautiful? For you, £150. You don't have to spend a lot of money on growing and collecting snowdrops. Here we've got a very expensive one, Treasure Island. It's one that's been on my wants list for quite a number of years, and it cost over £200. But here we've got Gins Imperati. It's just as beautiful as snowdrop, readily available. You can buy this for £4 or £5. So this is upper school. Here the snowdrops have come from middle school. They've bulked up, they're growing, they're vigorous, they're ready to be potted on. The majority of them will get put in aquatic pots like that, and they'll be plunged in the garden, sunk in the garden, in John Innes #2 with a bit of added grit. Snowdrops love drainage. You can easily locate and raise the pots every so often to check for problems or to replace the compost. This snowdrop is called Roger's Ruff. It comes from Kent, presumably from a bloke called Roger. Whether he was rough or not, I don't know. This is snowdrop Voronovii from the Russian forests. It's a sturdy grower, as you'd expect from Russia. It has bright green leaves, plain white flowers, vigorous snowdrop, shouldn't cost too much to buy. It's a good plant, I would say, for a beginner to grow. This is Paddy's Ketton. It comes from Ireland. It's been around for at least 80 years. It's a very well-known snowdrop. A very reliable grower. It's the nearest thing we've got in the garden to a weeping snowdrop. I've never tried snowdrops in hanging baskets, but if I did, I would try this one. This beautiful snowdrop, it's the sort of bulb that's going to sell for £400 or £500 each. So I suppose the whole pot at the current prices is worth about £6,000. Sadly, I've succumbed and named this one after myself, so it's Galanthus Steve Owen. I've waited for 17 years to find a snowdrop that I wanted to name for myself, and this is that one.
I'm cutting back last year's growth on the penstemons here. I kept them on despite the fact that they look untidy because they do form a protective layer. However, now is the time to get rid of those, and so we can have this year's plant unfettered. Penstemons produce their tubular flowers in a range of dramatic colours, but you will have to wait till mid to late summer for them to be in full bloom. Whereas in front, that Daphne, very delicately flowering. Daphnes have never done very well for me. So actually, it's double a pleasure to see them when they do perform. And I've got 2 or 3. They're small, they're almost fragile, but they're very beautiful. Come on, Nige. Come on. Good boy. Magnolias provide one of the most spectacular of all spring's floral displays. And Nick Bailey discovered some extraordinary specimens when he visited Care Hayes in Cornwall.
Bold, yet delicate. Brief, but memorable. Feared, yet admired. The magnolia is a plant of contradictions. And if you haven't got one in your garden, now might just be the moment to consider introducing one. Magnolias come into bloom before they've produced any leaves. So imagine a garden in the depths of winter, cold and still. Yet the magnolia's bare branches are covered in beautiful buds, creating a spectacular silhouette and the promise of life to come. Magnolias are one of the most ancient flowering plants. Along with trees such as ginkgos and metasequoias, fossil records have suggested they existed over 25 million years ago, and its ancestors go even further back. They were one of the first flowering plants on Earth, and back then there weren't flying insects, there weren't bees, so they evolved to draw in beetles for pollination. These outer structures had to be tough and leathery so they weren't damaged by the beetle, and all importantly, the carpel, the seed protecting device in the centre, was also woody and tough to make sure it wasn't damaged by the beetles so that the plant could produce future generations of beautiful magnolias. Magnolias are available in a huge range of sizes, colours and forms. Many of the wild species of magnolia, such as this Campbellii alba, tend to be absolutely vast, so they're perfect for big gardens. And look at this, absolutely spectacular. The flowers are literally the size of my head, and you've got this suffused tone which comes into the back of the petal, and then layer upon layer going into that beautiful structure in the centre. What a magnificent plant. This is Magnolia Sargentia var robusta, and it's one of the biggest of all the wild species. And look at the size of this bud. Not many plants can muster anything of that scale. And of course, that then bursts open and then produces these very, very delicate pink blooms with a boss of carpels and floral structures in the centre. What more could you ask from a flower? Spectacular as it is, we haven't all got space for 15-metre high magnolias, but thankfully there are plenty of small, compact cultivars that will work in most gardens. And this is a good example. This is Magnolia ballerina. It's very different to the typical magnolias you see. Instead of those upright facing tepals, it's actually got many, many more, and they're fine and open. So it's got this beautiful loose quality to the flower. You can also see it's absolutely packed with buds, so it can have a much longer flower run than many of the magnolias. Now, it is small, so works well for an average sized garden, or if you're really limited for space, you can grow it in a container, which will keep it really compact. So most magnolias will only flower for about 2 weeks, and that may lead you to question whether they're really worth growing in the garden. They can't compete with roses or jasmines that keep repeat blooming through the season. But what they do is give you the most delicious teas and prelude to the spring that's just round the corner.
As we're all spending much more time at home, now is a good opportunity to plan ahead for summer. This is where I keep all the dahlias over winter. And now it's time to get them out and check them. These were put away about November this year. The idea is to lift them just after the first frost. When the leaves blacken, then you can lift them up, and that means the tubers won't be touched. I've stored them in plastic, and remember, we're trying to cut down on plastic, but the first and the best thing you can do with your plastic is to use it, because it's the throwing away of it that is the problem. So they've been stored in plastic and old potting compost. And you can see there's a little bit of growth there in the dark. Now, if I lift this up, and this is a variety called Chimborazo, which is a lovely red and yellow one for the jewel garden. Get rid of all the loose compost so you can inspect it. The idea is just to go over each dahlia and make sure it's in good nick. We use old potting compost, but you could use vermiculite if you've got it, sand, any material that will remain moist without being sopping wet, because what we want are nice plump tubers. Two things I'm looking for is, are they shriveled up, in which case they're too dry, or are they rotten, in which case they're probably too wet, although it could have been eaten. We've got a little bit of problem. That's actually slug damage, but that is a nice firm tuber, so I'm not going to take that off. There we have a rotten one. A little bit of mould on there, but that's no problem. We've got another shriveled up tuber there, so that can come out. Slightly damaged one, but that's okay. That's a good plant. Now, there are two things I can do with this at this stage. I can pot them up in fresh compost, water them, put them somewhere warm, and that will trigger them into growth. Or I can force them with heat above a radiator, or if you've got a heated mat, put them on there, water them. You will get vigorous new growth, and that makes great material for cuttings. And actually, that's what I'm going to do with this. So I've got fresh compost here. This is a coir-based compost. So what we want to do is build new tubers and grow the ones we have so that they are really strong. We're feeding the roots and the top growth. And the new cut material is going to come from the top there. And now that will go on a heated mat in the greenhouse, and I reckon we'll be taking cuttings from that in about 4 weeks' time. Dahlias come in hundreds of shapes, sizes and forms. Withy Pits in West Sussex has a unique selection. And last September, we went to meet its creator, Richard Ramsey, when the flowers were at their very best.
Today I'm cutting some caffeolet for a florist. We will probably harvest this year something around 30,000 high-quality stems. Our market is the top-end event florists. Our customers expect perfection, which is what we try to give them. Mostly they're looking for big blooms because a lot of the work event florists do is in big, spectacular locations. Caffeolet, it was publicised in a Californian bridal magazine, I guess around 10 years or so ago, as the bridal dahlia because of the colour. I think there's just such a variety of shapes, sizes and colours. You can have half a dozen red dahlias next to each other. Actually, they're all different kinds of reds. So it's the subtleties in the plain coloured dahlias that make them very special. And then when you get something like the one we're sitting amongst now, it's called Aljo, you get the different nuances of colour in the same flower. But they range from the pom-poms that are about 20 centimetres in diameter, up to the giant decoratives, and which will be sort of 30 centimetres plus. So very big flowers. They're incredibly versatile plants for the garden. We produce around 6,000 to 7,000 rooted cuttings each year, because growing from tubers, you don't get that same colour intensity or vibrancy. So this is a dahlia called Gay Princess, which is the same as the pink one across there in the garden beds. But this is grown from a rooted cutting, and this is one of the flowers we've cut from there to show you the difference between growing from a tuber and from a rooted cutting. So the farmed flower has greater intensity of colour. The glow from the centre is more intense than it is on this one. This is just largely pink and a bit of white. This has this creamy glow coming from the centre as well. So the whole flower is showing more vibrancy. Englehart's Matador, that is grown from the rooted cutting, has this much richer, more intense colour. And in fact, the flower that comes from the tuber, some people would have difficulty believing it's even the same variety. It's such a paler imitation. So if you're thinking about entering your local show later this year, and the dahlia section, make sure you're growing your dahlias from rooted cuttings. To get a spectacular bloom like this on a nice long stem, what we do is disbud, which means taking out the side shoots as we go down each leaf node, and we just push them downwards so that we don't break the skin on the stem that's coming up there. It just becomes an automated process. You walk along the bed, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, side shoots, out they come. Well, you call it the dahlia eye, and I don't think I can explain exactly what it is. It is just knowing what is right and what isn't quite right. So when I cut 10 stems to go off to market, they have passed the dahlia eye test. I can do it, and my granddaughter Jemima can do it. Yeah, they're good, but nobody else can.
This is a good example of a dahlia because the petals are evenly spaced and they're equally sized, and the petals in the middle are nicely grouped. You kind of have to think about like what it looks like and like the patterns of the petals and things, but also it's kind of like, oh, this one's good, this one's less so, and then kind of just going with your gut as well.
We see them every day, and even I think, well, wow, that looks spectacular after donkey's years of growing them. So when other people come here and can enjoy them as well, that's good. That's good. And hopefully we encourage more people to grow dahlias.
While dahlias add magic to any garden, they do need care over winter. But there are exotic plants that are very easy to grow from seed, and you don't have to look after them over winter because they're essentially annuals and you can discard them. And there's a plant that I never would be without, certainly in the jewel garden, and that is Tithonia. Like dahlias, Tithonia has its origins in Mexico and will introduce a rich splash of orange into a border. I'm using coir plugs, which after 5 to 10 minutes in water, puff up ready to sow seeds into. Now, when I've sown them and I've placed them on top, I'll turn the pencil round and just push them gently in so they don't fall off. As well as Tithonia, I'm going to sow a climber, Cobea scandens, that flowers from midsummer right through till the first frost. Now, these seeds should be set on edge. There's no need to cover it up because actually light will help germination. Cobea and Tithonia do need some heat to germinate. And it's a good idea to get on with this now so you get good, strong plants to plant out in midsummer. Perhaps, who knows, this could be a job for the weekend. And here are some others. If you've got an apple or a pear tree, it's important to get on and do any pruning that you want to do now. But remember, pruning at this time of year stimulates vigorous regrowth. And this new growth will not bear any fruit for at least 2 and up to 4 more years. So plan ahead. And the general idea is to create a permanent, open framework through which a pigeon can easily fly. After a hard winter, ferns are looking very bedraggled. And now is the time to cut off all top growth to reveal the knuckle of bud that will burst forth with new fronds very soon. One of the best spring jobs is to mulch your borders. Put a layer of organic material, and I'm using homemade compost, over all bare soil. The important thing is to keep it good and thick. Far better to do a small area properly than a thin layer over the whole garden. Over the coming weeks and even months, when most of us are going to be spending much more time at home, we'd love to know what you and your family are doing to keep yourself busy in the garden. So we'll be asking you to send us your gardening videos so that we can share them, and hopefully they will inspire everyone to get out into their garden for their well-being. And we'll give you more information on exactly how to do this later in the series. We all know that gardening is good for our physical and mental health, and that has never been as important as it is now. In the last few days, the frogs here at Longmeadow have really got busy. There are so many, and there's frog spawn there, and that is increasing by the day. And what frogs like for their frog spawn is still shallow water. Now, it could be a puddle, it could be just a little area, but if you've got a pond, resist any temptation to clean it out, tidy it up, or add any plants. Let the frogs do their thing. And their cycle is they come to the water now, they lay the frog spawn, that then hatches out, and the young frogs will leave in summer. The adult frogs will leave the water by and large and spend most of their time on land, in your garden, eating slugs. So you want to treasure them, apart from the fact that they are completely fascinating. Well, that's it for today. Don't forget that this weekend the clocks go forward, the best day in the gardening calendar. In these extremely difficult times, I can assure you that all of us here at the Gardeners World team are doing everything we can to bring you the programme. Now, as you can imagine, this is something of a challenge, but we're all mucking in to make that happen. So next week, the programme comes from Adam's Garden, and I'll see you back here at Longmeadow very soon. So until then, bye-bye.